Did you know that millennials are the largest generation in the U.S. workforce? Today, we're going to talk about millennials and their changing relationship with money and their jobs, especially given the repeated setbacks that they've had, the Great Recession, and of course, dealing with the pandemic. I want to bring in our guest for this discussion, Prudential Financial's Vice Chair, Rob Falzon. Rob, thank you so much for being here. And let's jump in with remembering that last year at CNBC at Work Summit, you talked about the future of work and the lessons that are being learned from the pandemic. And honestly, I think every company is still learning lessons. So what have we learned in this last year, and how has that influenced Prudential's go-forward approach to the future of work?
So, Jen, yeah, we are continuing to learn, but everything that we're learning is confirming what we talked about a year ago, which is hybrid equals the future of work. They're one and the same. Now, having said that, how we do hybrid, we're all still figuring that out. I call it the grand experiment, and it's going to take time, 6 to 12 months of trying things out, learning from what we try, adjusting, and then trying some more. So I think it's going to be this continuous learning cycle in terms of how you actually implement hybrid. There are two things that I think we know based on the experiences we've already had over the course of the last year. The first is that there are two dimensions to hybrid. There's a time dimension to it, and there's a location dimension to it. We always focus on the location, it's working from home, but there's time component too of, when during the day people are going to be engaging. And that requires that individuals and organizations develop asynchronous learning learn asynchronous working capabilities, and they invest in technology that helps to get over both the space differential and the time differential. The second thing we know is that hybrid doesn't mean fully remote. Quite distinct. Just a sort of a quick learning we had on that. 2 summers ago, our intern class was fully remote, like most organizations. When we made offers to that intern class, 15% of that class accepted our offers. This past summer, we did a hybrid experience for our summer interns. When we made offers, that number went to 75%. So there's clearly a benefit to an in-office presence combined with a remote presence.
So, Rob, you talk about this great experiment that we're all living through, and I really want to dive in on millennials because they're the largest generational cohort right now, more than 1 in 3 in the workforce. So given that scale, how are they influencing what employers are doing and their approaches post-pandemic?
Yeah, so I'm obviously not a millennial, but I think I have some perspectives on this. 40% of our workforce are millennials, actually a little higher than the national average. 2, our series of pulse surveys that we do we're digging deeper into the millennial population as we're exploring those pulse surveys. And 3rd, I actually have 3 adult children, all of which are millennials, so I'm getting some very firsthand observations and experience on their experiences. What I would tell you, Jen, is they are leading the entire workforce population in the things that we're seeing emerge in the new workplace. So, for instance, highest desires for flexibility, both, as I said before, with respect to time and location, and they're more mobile. When we've seen the statistics around resignations and turnover, as we've done some surveying on that, the millennial generation has got like 3 times the level of turnover that we see in the baby boomer generation or in the Gen X generation.
So has there been anything surprising in the pulse surveys that you've been doing on millennials? Because I do think, look, we've been in the pandemic now for a few years. People have been watching this generation sort of come of age. What are the key figures that really surprise you most that kind of inform where we're going?
Well, I think it's what I found particularly surprising, but the more I thought about it, the more sort of rational it became, is attitudes and behaviors that millennials have, both toward the workplace and toward their relationship with money, whether that be in savings or in debt in many of their instances. Because of the experience that millennials have had, they are frankly a little more cynical in the surveys and things that you do, and less attached and less positive about the workplace. And then with respect to sort of their financial condition, they're less further along than they think they should have been, and probably should have been based on looking at other generations, because of when they graduated into, graduating into the great financial crisis, and then having a recession that followed that, and then with the pandemic, and now potentially a third recession that they're facing. And that's led to a behavior that's really been quite interesting, which is they're actually more risk taking, both with their careers and with how they go about saving. And so, one of the statistics that came out that actually kind of stunned me was there are millennials own as much in crypto investments as they own in mutual funds. And I think it's a reflection of when you don't have a lot to lose because you're so far behind, risk taking actually becomes somewhat rational for them.
Right. I mean, it really has been, from the Great Recession, as you said, to the pandemic, to the uncertainty that we have right now, that we're looking forward into what's going to happen in 2023. So they're taking risks. How do they feel, though, about their prospects in terms of their financial future? You said they're cynical. Like, how cynical are they?
Well, let's look at that experience that they've had. I mean, from their standpoint, the social contract that we all sort of assume is in place has been broken. It's like, if I work hard, I get a good education, and I do well, I'll get a good job, and that good job will lead to, if not financial security, if not financial prosperity. And they haven't seen any of that materialize. And so they come into the workplace with a lower inclination for loyalty to their employer. That drives that higher mobility number, so 3 times the level of turnover for that generation than you see in others. And that's an expression of sort of the cynicism they have around their relationship with their employer. And then as they're looking for financial advice, they spend more time in social media looking for that advice than they do with more traditional financial advisors. And another symptom of that sort of more risk-taking attitude that they developed as a result of the experiences and the disappointments that they've had vis-a-vis their expectations.
I mean, it really has been unprecedented, disruptive change, not just for millennials, but for the entire workforce, for the general population as well, and this new reality of really how we work. So what are some of the larger population's feelings in terms of their relationship with employers and work?
Well, if you look at surveys that are taken on this, Jen, what you find is that the general population actually has there's been a loss in trust in institutions across the board, whether they be what we typically think of as institutions, employers, or government institutions and otherwise. I actually believe that there's an opportunity for corporations to play a role as kind of a port in the storm for workers. That trust there is, relatively speaking, higher than it is amongst other institutions. And employers have an opportunity with this evolution in the work model, where this blurring has occurred between personal life and work life because of the remote experience. That as that comes together, if you can view your employer as sort of an extension of your personal life and a safe haven and a place of trust, I think that corporations that figure this out will be better at attracting talent into the organization, at retaining them, and that ultimately, I think, will lead to better experiences for those employees, both from an employment, career development, and from a financial security standpoint.
And in terms of those experiences, the consensus across the generations right now, is there any on hybrid work and the model that we're seeing come about?
Well, where there's a lot of consensus, it's over 70% consistently in the surveys that we've done of workers have a preference for hybrid work. And so that's what comes out consistently. Where there's inconsistency, Jen, is what hybrid means. And so this idea of it's flexible, but does that mean I'm coming in once a week, once a month, 3 days a week, 4 days a week? Does it mean that each week it's a fixed number of days, or do I have flexibility to say this week I'm coming in on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, but next week I'm going to come in on Monday and Thursday? Those are the pieces that we have to figure out, and where there's not a lot of consensus yet. In fact, what I would say is there's quite a bit of distance between where employers are generally and what they'd like to have, and what employees are telling their employers they would like to have. And we have to close that gap. And that's what I refer to as this grand experiment. It's going to take us 6, maybe even 12 months of playing around with this before we actually define that new model. But when we define that new model, it's very exciting because it is going to be the future of work. It's the sort of the next generation of what workplace will look like, a substantial change from what we've seen over the last 50 to 100 years.
Just to wrap up, it's interesting that all of this is happening against a backdrop for the labor market that's actually changing right before our eyes. I mean, if you look at JOLTS or the most recent labor numbers, it's still tight, but it is cooling. So what is the best way to attract and retain, especially this key millennial workforce in this time right now when we have uncertainty in the labor market?
So yeah, to your point, while I don't think it has shifted, that the pendulum has yet swung the other way. I would say that the pendulum has come more back into balance, and we're seeing that in the general population statistics. And incidentally, we're mirroring that within our own organization, so we're seeing a little bit more of a balance on that. But where we still see gaps is around skilling, and so there's a high degree of competition, to the point of your question, around the right kind of employees that can actually fill the needs that you've got for what the future of work is going to look like for every given company. And for us, that's something we're spending a lot of time focused on. So what we're trying to do is to create an environment where when individuals come into our organization, they come into an organization that, to the earlier question, it's a port in the storm. They look at it as a mission-driven company, a place where they can not only start their career, but they can significantly develop their career. So we're doing a lot of investment in skilling and reskilling and upskilling on a continuous basis for individuals, giving them opportunities to move around the company so they can get that mobility that they're looking for, but not necessarily move from the company in order to get that mobility, and then providing flexibility around the workplace. And I think if you can do those three things, you have a formula that's going to be very appealing to the best of talent that's out there, and that's going to allow you to attract them in and to keep them.